Welcome to the Depth Dive. We've got a really interesting stack of sources today. They're pulled from a recent, pretty popular tech Q&A video, and it covered some topics I think a lot of you might be wrestling with right now.
Yeah, it's a good mix. Some big hardware questions, definitely. TVs specifically, like which high-end set works best where. And then a big jump into software, right? WWDC.
Exactly. Apple's latest announcements. So our mission today is pretty straightforward. Let's unpack the key insights, maybe some surprising bits from this Q&A. We want to help you figure out those, sometimes tricky TV choices depending on your room, and also get a clearer picture of what's actually changing in the OCs we use every day. The big stuff and maybe the subtle stuff too.
Sounds good. Where should we start the TV debate?
Let's jump right in there. The first big question in the source hits this head-on. Someone asked, okay, bright room, lots of ambient light. What's the better pick? Is it the LG G4, that top-tier OLED? Or is it the Sony Bravia 9, their flagship Mini-LED?
Right, that's a classic comparison. And the video jumps right in saying, look, this is tough because both are absolutely phenomenal TVs. The LG G4, they called it tremendous, even pretty close to perfect.
High praise.
Definitely. And the Sony Bravia 9. Also, top marks, as good as it gets for a Mini-LED TV. The core difference, obviously, one's OLED, one isn't.
And when you think OLED, like that G4, the strengths that usually come up, and the source mentioned them too, are that, incredibly rich color, pure color, and unbeatable contrast, right? Those perfect blacks.
Exactly. Perfect blacks, vibrant colors, that's the OLED magic. But the source really focused on the challenge for OLEDs in a bright room based on their own testing. Even a great one like the G4, it can struggle. They mentioned seeing unwanted light, glare, basically. They even simulated it with a studio light to show how reflections could be an issue.
Okay, so if glare is the potential OLED weakness there, how did the Sony Bravia 9, the Mini-LED, compare in that specific bright room test?
Well, this is where the Bravia 9 kind of pulls ahead, according to their analysis. It really boils down to brightness. It's just a brighter TV. And that extra brightness lets it, as they put it, juice up the highlights in HDR content. Meaning like in a bright room where ambient light is hitting the screen, those really bright parts of the picture, sun reflections, headlights, explosions, whatever, they still manage to stand out. They still pop. On the G4, maybe under that same direct light, those highlights could get a little washed out or lost.
Makes sense. So G4 is amazing overall, but for that specific bright room use case, the Bravia 9's brightness gives it an edge. Did the source mention any other contenders for bright rooms? I feel like they touched on a couple quickly.
They did, yeah. Briefly mentioned the Samsung S95D OLED. They tested it side by side with the G4 before and pointed out its glare-free panel was a big help in bright spots. And also Samsung's top 4K Mini-LED, the QN90F, which kind of combines the Mini-LED brightness, like the Sony, but with that same glare-free panel tech. So yeah, other options of brightness is really your number one thing.
Okay, interesting. Let's flip the script then. From bright rooms to dark rooms. The next question was quite different. Someone who already has an OLED, an LG C4, moving to a bigger place. And they're facing this dilemma: stick with OLED, maybe go up to an 83-inch C4, and go really big 98-inch TCL QM8, which is Mini-LED. But here's the key. Their main thing is watching 4K Blu-rays in a dark room. And they did admit, big is nice.
Oh, yeah, big is nice is definitely relatable. And the video agreed, like, once you go big, it's hard to go back.
Yeah.
They called the QM8 itself a phenomenal TV, great for bright rooms, sports, all that. Yeah. And obviously, watching movies on a screen that huge is just fun.
In context, right. Coming from OLED, prioritizing darkroom Blu-ray quality.
And that was the absolute pivot point of the analysis. Yes, the 98-inch QM8 is great, but for someone used to OLED quality and focused on dark-room, high-bitrate Blu-rays. The video argued that switching to the QM8, even at 98 inches, would actually be a step backward in pure picture quality for that specific scenario. They were pretty emphatic. Dark-room, 4K Blu-ray viewing in OLED is a match made in home theater heaven. It's about optimizing for quality there.
Okay, but 83 inches versus 98 inches, that's still a 15-inch difference. That feels pretty significant, doesn't it?
It is a difference, yeah. But they brought up a comparison they'd done before to 65-inch OLED versus the 98-inch QM8. That 33-inch difference, they described it as in your face. You just can't ignore it.
Right.
But shrinking that gap down to 15 inches, the 83 C4 versus the 98 QA, the suggestion was you probably won't miss that size difference nearly as much, especially when the trade-off is sacrificing that superior OLED image quality that's just perfect for high-quality darkroom viewing.
So for that specific user, considering their priorities, their history with OLED,
The advice was pretty clear. You've invested in top-quality physical media, 4K Blu-rays. You want to see them at their absolute best. Don't compromise that picture quality. Stick with the OLED for that specific viewing habit.
all right, makes sense. Let's shift gears completely now. The other major chunk of this Q&A video was Apple's WWDC. And they definitely set it up as being jam-packed, lots of announcements, some big changes coming.
It really felt that way.
Yeah.
The video kind of boiled down the big theme to two things. One, this whole visual transformation happening across the OCs. And two, Apple unifying the software names. Everything's moving to version 26 for the software coming in 2026, iOS 26, iPadOS 26, macOS 26, WatchOS.
Yeah.
You get it.
Right, that makes things cleaner. Even launching 26 software in 2025 feels a bit odd.
Yeah, they mentioned finding it slightly irritating, but admitted long-term it just makes tracking things easier, gets everything aligned.
Okay, so that visual transformation in iOS 26, what did they highlight? What's actually changing in the look and feel?
The big headline was this new liquid glass display style. And they were careful. This isn't the old liquid metal hardware stuff people talked about years ago. This is pure software aesthetics. And apparently, it's already a bit divisive. Some viewer comments mentioned it looked like the old Windows Vista Aero theme. Remember that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Glassy and translucent.
Exactly. So examples they gave included like a clear mode, icons turning see-through, menus getting translucent like the Safari bottom bar, more rounded corners everywhere. Just general, more dynamic effects, things fading in and out, kind of extending that dynamic island vibe across the whole OS, making it feel more alive, more dynamic.
And what about that lock screen clock thing? That sounded interesting.
Oh, yeah, that was a neat touch. The analysis called it making the phone feel much more context-aware. Basically, the clock on your lock screen interacts with the wallpaper behind it. It might stretch up or down depending on the photo. A small thing, but they felt it makes the phone feel more integrated, more yours.
So overall, the vibe on these iOS 26 visual changes, good, bad, and different.
The take seemed to be, look, maybe not major, groundbreaking functional changes, but a really needed redesign, a visual refresh. The feeling was Apple software had looked pretty much the same for a long time. This moves away from pure minimalism, adds some visual interest. And they noted viewers seemed quite positive about that shift.
Okay. The video also spent time on Apple Intelligence, right? Referencing interviews with Apple execs. What was the main message Apple is trying to send about what this is?
Yeah, according to the source, Apple's really pushing hard on the message that they're not creating a chatbot. I think there's this assumption that AI just means Chat GPT or Gemini, conversational AI.
Right.
But Apple's focus, based on those interviews, is more about the phone, using generative AI behind the scenes to do things better for you, making existing features smarter, offering helpful suggestions within the OS, that kind of thing. Less about having a chat, more about integrated assistance.
But the video also kind of hinted that maybe Apple Intelligence felt a bit incomplete or maybe delayed compared to expectations. Why was that?
They pointed to comments from Apple execs explaining they had two versions running internally, V1 and V2. Version 2 was apparently the deeper, more ambitious idea, but it just wasn't performing well enough yet. So they had to pivot, launch with V1 essentially, and V2 will come later. The video also added some perspective, noting that even Google's Gemini on Pixel isn't exactly massive yet in its integration. Features shown like Genmoji or Image Playground were described as, fine, but maybe not the killer app driving upgrades just yet.
Gotcha. Okay, let's move over to iPadOS 26 then. The video said this was something people are very excited about. Why the excitement there?
The excitement seems to stem from iPadOS 26, really blurring that line between macOS and iPadOS even more than before. They even pulled a kind of surprising quote from an Apple exec interview. Someone asked, "How do you choose between Mac and iPad?" And the exec apparently half joked, "Maybe the answer is to buy both," implying they're becoming powerful in different, maybe overlapping ways.
Interesting. So what specific changes in iPadOS 26 allow for that blurring of lines? What did they detail?
It really comes down to window management. Big changes there. With iPadOS 26, you can finally freely resize windows. You can stack windows on top of each other. You can snap windows into thirds or halves easily. Basically, as the video put it, it makes iPadOS work a lot more like you would expect a computer to work. Much more flexible multitasking.
And what's the potential impact for users? Did they talk about early impressions?
Yeah, they cited some first impressions from a beta tester who's like a power iPad user, doesn't own a separate computer. And for that kind of person, these changes are apparently expected to transform their lives.
Hmm.
It means they can finally do proper computing on the go right on the iPad, which is huge for productivity-focused users.
Okay, the big question then. When do we actually get our hands on all this new stuff? iOS 26, iPadOS 26.
Well, the video gave the standard educated guess based on Apple's history. iOS usually drops alongside the new iPhones, so think sometime in the middle of September.
Hmm.
And they expect iPadOS, maybe the CarPlay updates too, to land around the same time.
But they included a warning about the betas, right?
Oh, absolutely. A big one. They stress that the developer betas available now can be buggy, janky,
Hmm.
definitely not stable for your main device. Really urged caution, saying if you must try them, use a spare phone or iPad. They're meant for developers to test their apps, not for everyday use yet.
Right, good warning. Wow, okay, we've covered a fair bit here. Navigating those TV choices, bright versus dark rooms, size versus picture quality, and then digging into Apple's updates, the new visual style, the AI strategy, and making the iPad feel more like a computer.
It's definitely a lot to think about, how these devices evolve. And maybe it leads to a final thought, building on what we discussed. We talked about the visual changes in iOS, the multitasking in iPadOS. How much do these types of updates, a visual refresh, better windowing, fundamentally change how you, the listener, actually use your tech day to day? Is it as impactful as, say, a totally new screen technology like OLED was, or maybe a truly useful AI feature down the line? How do all these smaller steps add up, and where do you see things going based on these announcements?
That's a great question to ponder. Which updates really move the needle for your personal use versus just being nice refinements? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope unpacking these insights gives you some food for thought for your own tech decisions and what might be coming next.